Hello friends, welcome to Expert Guidance, and today in this video we'll be covering another unit of your AQA GCSE Paper 1 Biology, which is Bioenergetics. Now to remind you, for your Paper 1 Biology, you need to cover cell biology, organization, infection and response, and bioenergetics. And today in this video we'll be focusing on bioenergetics. Now in this video we'll be looking over the process of photosynthesis, what are the factors affecting photosynthesis, how plants use glucose made during photosynthesis, what are greenhouses, and what is respiration. So let's begin. Now, you must remember from your key stage 2, 3 that photosynthesis is the process in which the light is used up by the plant, and it also uses carbon dioxide. It combines it with the water taken from the soil, and the plant has chlorophyll that traps the light, and that converts all these into sugar or carbohydrates and releases oxygen as a byproduct. So this is what is the process of photosynthesis. So it is a process by which green plants prepare their own food by using water, carbon dioxide in presence of sunlight to form glucose and oxygen. And you need to remember this equation. This is very important. CO2 and water in presence of light, and you can also write chlorophyll if you want, to form sugar and oxygen, or glucose and oxygen. If you can remember the word equation, that would be great. So it is carbon dioxide plus water, H2O gives C6H12O6 plus O2. Remember, you have to put 6 everywhere except in the glucose. Okay. Now, why only leaf can photosynthesize? Why not roots? The reason for that is the presence of chloroplast. The leaves have chloroplast, which contains chlorophyll in it, which is a green pigment that can trap light energy from the leaves. And helps them to photosynthesize. Next is, if you remember from the energy changes video for chemistry, we discussed what is an endothermic and an exothermic reaction. So if there's any reaction that takes in heat or energy, that's an endothermic reaction. Now you can see in this, photosynthesis is taking light energy, hence it is an endothermic reaction. In terms of one making and breaking of chemistry, you can also explain endothermic as it requires more energy to break the carbon dioxide and water bond. Then it releases energy in forming the glucose and the oxygen bond. So you need to remember that photosynthesis is an endothermic process. And why is it endothermic? You should know that. Now, in order to do maximum photosynthesis, you can see that the leaf has come up with a very great structure that makes it possible to photosynthesize in the best way. What are the adaptation a leaf has for photosynthesis? If you see the leaf, they always lie flat, they are thin, and they have veins in them. So the veins ensure the quick delivery of water and the minerals. They lie flat so that the surface area is the maximum for the absorption of the light. On the other hand, they are packed with chloroplast and chlorophyll that can trap maximum light for photosynthesis. They require carbon dioxide and they leave oxygen. So for a gas exchange, they have air spores in it called the stomata. The stomata have the guard cells which opens and close to trap and exchange the gases. Next, the photosynthetic cells, can you see, they just lie at the surface so that they can use the maximum light possible for photosynthesis. So they can ask you in the exam, what are the different adaptations a leaf has for maximum photosynthesis? So make sure you remember them well. Okay, next is, what are the factors that affects the rate of photosynthesis? Now, the factors that affects the rate of photosynthesis, you can easily see these are the factors which are actually affecting the photosynthesis. Okay, so if you see oxygen is required, carbon dioxide is required, water is required. So all these factors, they affects the rate of photosynthesis. Okay, so if we see here, these are the factors which are affecting the rate of photosynthesis. It is the light, carbon dioxide, temperature, and the pH. Okay, now, how does light affect the rate of photosynthesis? As the light intensity increases, the rate of photosynthesis increases up to a point and then it levels off. Why is that? Because further increasing a light up to a threshold can make other factors limiting. Like if the light increases too much, maybe that can increase the temperature. So high temperature can then be a limiting factor. The same thing happens with carbon dioxide. If the concentration of carbon dioxide increase, the rate of photosynthesis increase up to a level, then it its levels off. Now, why it increases up to the level? Because we cannot increase carbon dioxide beyond a certain point. Why? Because if we increase carbon dioxide beyond a certain point, it can affect the pH, and then the pH can become a limiting factor. Now, for the temperature, the graph looks a little different, and you need to remember this graph and explain this graph. As the temperature increases, as per chemistry, the particle gains more kinetic energy, they collide more, increasing the rate of reaction. And that's what we can easily see from the graph, that as the temperature is increasing, the rate of photosynthesis is increasing. Now, as it reaches 40 degrees, there we get the maximum rate of photosynthesis, and this point where we get the maximum rate is known as the optimum temperature. Now, as it reaches the optimum temperature, then it suddenly drops beyond that. Why is that? Because the temperature greater than 40 degrees is not good for the enzymes. You need to remember at this point, you have to use this word, the enzyme gets denatured. Now, what is the denaturation of the enzyme? With high temperature, the proteins, enzymes are generally proteins, with sensitive to temperature, the proteins change its shape, or the enzyme changes its shape. As the enzyme changes its shape, it is no longer effective, as the substrate molecules can no longer bind to it, and that decreases the rate of photosynthesis suddenly. Okay. Whereas in pH, we get a little bell-shaped curve, and it works the same way. The rate increases up to the optimum, and then it drops. Why? Because the same thing, the high pH, it changes the shape of the enzymes, which make them non-functional. Okay, so there is a law of limiting factor, that any factor which is present in the least amount, either carbon dioxide and water, that will affect the rate of photosynthesis, and that factor is known as limiting factor. So in order to get maximum rate of photosynthesis, what we should do, we should control these limiting factors, and that we easily do in a greenhouse, that we'll be checking out next. Now, you must have done this experiment in school. How do you measure the rate of photosynthesis? We take a aquatic pondweed like Elodia hydrilla. We insert it into water, okay, and then we measure the temperature of the water, and then we bring the light intensity, and we will see the bubbles coming off. The bubbles coming off is of oxygen, which indicates the photosynthesis is taking place. More the bubbles, greater is the rate of photosynthesis. So you can test various factors affecting photosynthesis by this experiment. If you want to check the light intensity, you can bring the light source near this and count the bubbles. Otherwise, you can take these light source a little far away and then again count the bubbles. And the greater the number of bubbles, greater is the rate of photosynthesis, and that can give you the indication about the rate of photosynthesis. So you can test various factors like temperature, water concentration, the intensity of the light, and you can plot the graph and see how the rate of photosynthesis is affected. Okay, and in most of the cases you will get this graph. With light you will get this graph, carbon dioxide you will get this graph, with temperature you will get this graph. You need to remember all these shapes and the explanation for the same. Now the question is, the glucose that is made in photosynthesis, what happens to that glucose? What is the fate of this glucose? Now this is the slide that summarizes what are the different ways in which the glucose is used up. The first basic way is it's the fuel for the cells. It's the fuel for the living organism. So this glucose is broken down during respiration and give energy to the plant to carry out their daily activities, grow and reproduce. The excess glucose is stored as starch, and starch is used up as a reserve food whenever it is needed by the plant. Now they'll ask you why we store the excess glucose as starch. Why we not just store it as glucose? The problem is the glucose is soluble in water, and as it's soluble in water, it can disturb the osmotic balance and can cause unnecessary osmosis of water. On the other hand, starch is insoluble complex molecule. It's a bigger molecule. It can take in large amount of glucose molecule. It can store large amount of glucose being compact, and the basic importance of that is it is insoluble. So as it is insoluble, you need to say it does not disturb the osmotic balance of the cell. Next is, you know that the plant has a cell wall made up of cellulose, and cellulose is also complex carbohydrate. So glucose can be converted into cellulose, which can provide shape and support to the plant. The glucose, if it combines with nitrates and other mineral ions, it can form proteins, and the glucose can also be converted into lipids, fats and oils, which can be stored as an emergency food reserve, or they can also be stored in the seed, which can provide the energy store for germination. So you should know what are the various ways in which the glucose is being used up in a plant cell. Now there's a test for starch. If you remember from your school chemistry or biology experiment, If there's a starch present, you add an iodine solution and the iodine solution turn blue-black. Now I'll take a leaf and I'll cover one leaf with a small black tape in the middle, and then I'll put it into the light. And then if I add iodine solution to this leaf, what I would observe that the part which was exposed to light will turn blue-black, because this was the part that got the privilege of getting photosynthesized and make starch, whereas the one which was covered didn't get any light, so it didn't get any chance to photosynthesize, so no starch is being made, so it didn't turn blue-black. So you should remember this iodine test for starch, and you can even test it on variegated leaves. What are variegated leaves? Which have different colors. Okay, so wherever there's a green color, that part will turn blue-black. The rest of the part will remain as the color of the iodine. Okay, so next is a greenhouse. Greenhouse, I think you must have seen in some nurseries, they cover and grow the plant in these covered conditions. The purpose of the greenhouse is it controls all the limiting factors to provide the maximum yield of photosynthesis. The limiting factors like temperature, light, carbon dioxide are manually controlled. It works on the principle of greenhouse effect, and it is beneficial for the countries like UK, where the temperature and light is not that much during the winter season. So you can put them in the greenhouse. The greenhouse allows the light to enter but didn't allow it to escape. So thereby the temperature is maintained and the light intensity is maintained. Otherwise, the farmers use bulbs and then cylinders for carbon dioxide and artificially control them to get the maximum possible yield of photosynthesis. Because the yield of photosynthesis can even vary during different times of the day. During morning, the light intensity is the limiting factor. When it comes to the noon, the light intensity is highest, but then the carbon dioxide closes to prevent transpiration, then carbon dioxide becomes a limiting factor. But we can control all these factors in a greenhouse and get maximum rate of photosynthesis, especially for those crops which are economically very important for us, like rice, wheat, and all those crops. Okay, so I hope the concept of photosynthesis, factors affecting photosynthesis, how we can maximize photosynthesis is clear to you. Now let us do the reverse of photosynthesis, which is respiration. Now, respiration is a process of breakdown of food to release energy. And it happens via two mechanisms. One is the aerobic and second is anaerobic. Aerobic, as the name suggests, air. So it happens in the presence of oxygen. Anaerobic takes place in the absence of oxygen. Aerobic releases more food as more energy as the food is completely broken down. Anaerobic releases less energy as the food is not completely broken down. Aerobic respiration takes place in mitochondria and it is the opposite of the photosynthesis, whereas the anaerobic respiration takes place in this cytoplasm. Now you should know the word equation for both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So for the aerobic respiration, it's the opposite of photosynthesis. So glucose plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide and water. So C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygen gives 6 CO2 and 6 water. For anaerobic respiration, there are two types, one in plants and animals. The anaerobic respiration in plant is fermentation, whereas glucose breaks down to form ethanol and carbon dioxide. And this is a very important process that takes place industrially to produce alcohol from yeast. So we take yeast and we give it the glucose, and the yeast has the enzyme which converts glucose into ethanol. The second importance for this reaction is it produces carbon dioxide, which is Baker's friend. So yeast is known as Baker's friend because we take yeast converts all the sugar and makes carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide rises and makes the dough soft. Whereas in animals, the anaerobic respiration takes place in muscles where glucose is converted into lactic acid. So you should know the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. You should know the equations of all of them and what is the difference in anaerobic respiration in plants and animals. Okay, so I hope this is clear to you. Now, most of the time students confuse and say breathing and respiration is the same. But that's not right. Breathing is a physical process. Breathing involves no chemical reaction. It's just taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. Whereas respiration is using this oxygen, combining it with the product of digestion, which is glucose. So it is a reaction between glucose and oxygen to form carbon dioxide and water, whereas breathing is just taking in oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide. Breathing does not involve enzymes. Respiration do involve enzyme. Breathing is a physical process. Respiration is a chemical process. Breathing releases no energy. Respiration is an exothermic process. It releases energy. Breathing takes place outside the cell. Respiration is a reaction that takes place within the cell. Now, if you remember, we just did that photosynthesis is endothermic. So respiration is exothermic. Exothermic means the energy released in making carbon dioxide and water is more than the energy taken in to break glucose and oxygen. Now, I hope you remember the site of respiration, that is mitochondria. Now, if you see, the inner membrane of the mitochondria is folded. Now, these folding is known as cristae. Cristae are the folding of the inner membrane of the mitochondria. They increases the surface area for the attachment of enzyme. Therefore, mitochondria is well adapted to carry out respiration. Okay. Now, the question is, what is the importance of respiration? Why do we need energy? Now, we need energy for these reasons. We need energy for movement. We need energy for transport of substances. We need energy to maintain the body temperature. We need energy to do catabolism. Catabolism is breaking down reactions of the body. We need energy for anabolism. Anabolism is making bigger molecules in the body. So we need energy for the muscles to contract, because when the muscles will contract, then only we'll be allowed to move. So muscle cells are responsible for movement, and they are well adapted to do respiration. Therefore, they have loads of mitochondria, and they also store glycogen, which is the fuel for respiration. Next is for transport. You know that for active transport, we need energy because it is a movement of substances against the concentration gradient. So we need energy for the transport via active transport. Now, if you remember, respiration produces heat. So if we need to maintain a higher body temperature, the respiration rate has to increase. So thermoregulation, that is, respiration produces heat to maintain the body temperature. We need energy. We need energy for digestion. We need energy to break down carbohydrates into sugars, proteins into amino acids, fats into fatty acids and cholesterol. On the other hand, we need anabolism. We need the glucose to be converted into cellulose in the plants. The energy is needed to convert glucose into glycogen into animals. The energy is needed to convert glucose into protein, fats, lipids, and oil. So for all these processes, we need energy. This question can come in the exam. What are the various ways in which the body uses energy? So you should remember all these factors. Okay. Next is a very important concept. What changes do you see in your body when you exercise? Now remember, whenever you exercise, the demand for two things suddenly increases in your body. This is the demand of oxygen and the demand of glucose, because we need energy, and glucose and oxygen are the raw materials for energy. So for having more oxygen, definitely, where do we get it? By breathing. So your breathing rate increases. So the breathing rate increases so that more oxygen is inhaled to meet the demands of the oxygen by the muscles. On the other hand, when you're exercising a lot, as your respiration rate increases, the carbon dioxide is built up at a greater rate in your cells. So that also needs to be expelled out of the body, and that again happens via increase in breathing rate. Next is the glucose is transported into the body via blood. Okay, and the blood is pumped by a heart. So to meet the demand for increasing glucose, your heart rate increases. It pumps more blood to the muscles, increases blood supply, increases the supply of both glucose and oxygens via blood to a muscle cell. Okay, and your body stores excess glucose as glycogen. So as the demand for glucose increases, the glycogen needs to be broken down back into the glucose, and this process is known as glycogenolysis. So the glycogen breakdown happens, and that breaks down happens into your cells, in the liver cells, to convert the lactic acid back into the glucose. The glycogen, back into the glucose. So that happens in your muscles. The glycogen, excess glycogen, gets converted into glucose. Okay. Now, have you ever seen that even after you have exercised, you have stopped exercise, your breathing rate is still high? What is the reason for that? Now, the reason for that is during exercise, due to less demand, less availability of oxygen, the body switches to anaerobic respiration. Now, if you remember, the anaerobic respiration in animals converts glucose into the lactic acid. Now, this lactic acid, when developed in greater quantity, can cause muscle fatigue, redness, swollenness of the body. But this lactic acid cannot be stored. It needs to be broken down back into carbon dioxide and water with oxygen. So your body has a depth of oxygen that even after you have stopped exercising, your body breathing rate will continue to high until this lactic acid gets broken down into carbon dioxide and water. So this is what happens after exercise. The oxygen depth, which is the extra oxygen needed by the body after the exercise to recover, is the oxygen needed to break down lactic acid into carbon dioxide and water. And This is why your breathing rate increases until all the lactic acid is broken down back into carbon dioxide and water. So make sure you remember this phenomenon of oxygen depth. Now, what is metabolism? Metabolism is the sum of all the reactions of the body, and we can categorize the metabolism into two categories. Catabolism is the breakdown reactions of the body, where breakdown of glycogens, proteins, lipids, respiration, that are all breakdown reaction. Anabolism is the synthesis reaction in which the bigger molecule is formed from the smaller ones, which is the synthesis of cellulose, starch and glycogen, synthesis of fats and oil, synthesis of proteins. Okay, and the last thing we need to do, liver. Why we are studying liver? Because liver is a very important organ involved in metabolism. It is doing a lot of synthesis and the breakdown reaction. Now, it is involved in detoxification, breakdown of the blood cells, breakdown of the lactic acid, and the breakdown of the harmful substances for excretion. So when we take in excess alcohol, that is broken down by your liver. When the blood cells are old, they are worn out, they are broken down in the liver. The lactic acid that is produced by anaerobic respiration, that is also converted into carbon dioxide and water by liver, and that is the oxygen depth. And the harmful the proteins cannot be stored in the body, so it is the liver that converts it into urea, which is excreted by the kidney as urine. Okay, so I hope you will remember all the functions of the liver. Okay, so now in this topic, just to summarize, we did what is photosynthesis and respiration, and this is the difference between photosynthesis and respiration. Photosynthesis takes place only in plant cell. Respiration occurs in all living cell. Photosynthesis is endothermic, respiration is exothermic. In photosynthesis, oxygen is produced. In respiration, oxygen is used up. Photosynthesis takes place in chloroplast, respiration takes place in mitochondria, or if it is anaerobic respiration, that will take in the cytoplasm of the cell. The photosynthesis is an anabolic reaction where glucose is made. Respiration is a catabolic reaction where glucose is broken down. Photosynthesis is dependent on light. Respiration is not that light dependent. Okay, so I hope this topic is clear to you. Now, this is the time to test yourself to see if you remember the key terms that we did in this topic. We talked about photosynthesis, which is the process by which green plants prepare their own food. Respiration, breakdown of food to release energy. Limiting factors is the factor that limits the rate of photosynthesis. Endothermic reaction is a reaction that takes in heat. Exothermic reaction is a reaction that releases heat. Glucose is a product of photosynthesis and fuel for respiration. Starch is the storage carbohydrates in plants. Glycogen is the storage carbohydrates in animals. Aerobic respiration is the breakdown of food in presence of oxygen. Anaerobic is the breakdown of food in absence of oxygen. In fermentation, anaerobic respiration in plants that produces ethanol and carbon dioxide. Greenhouse is a glass or a plastic house to control the limiting factor and increase the rate of photosynthesis. Metabolism is the sum of all catabolic and anabolic reactions of the body. Liver is an organ involved in the metabolism. Lactic acid is a product of anaerobic respiration in animals. And oxygen depth is the extra oxygen needed after exercise to break down lactic acid and recover to the pre-exercise stage. Okay, so I hope all these topics and all these terms are clear to you. Now, as I always stress, the next step is to check the specification to make sure whatever mentioned in the specification, you understand that well. And you have to do exam questions on this topic, which you can find on my website. So I hope you like this video. If you like this video, then do not forget to like, comment, and share this video. And do not forget to click on the bell icon at the bottom so that you get the notification as soon as I put another video. And I promise you I'll be putting loads of helpful videos before your exam, which you'll find really helpful for your exams. And if there's any specific topic you want me to make a video on, just leave a comment below and I'll make sure I put that up before your exam. If you still have any doubts with any of this concept or any problem in science during your exam, then you can come to my website. On my website, we have a 24/7 chat support where you can put all your queries and get instant reply. Okay, so please go over this topic very, very seriously because it's a very important topic and there are many questions that are asked in the exam. So I'll see you next in the next video. Till then, happy revising.